most of the focus, is about the privatization and the taking over at the port. Here in Seattle, which I'm part of the Port of Seattle, we've been dealing with the issue of billionaires, Steve Hansen trying to build hotels and stadium close to the ports, and that would eliminate the jobs. We fought against that. We was able to defeat that. But no, presently we have the issue of Coast Guard. This Coast Guard is trying to expand the footprint on the ports. So they are actually located between Terminal Pier 36, and we got this terminal Pier 46 where we have a container. We lost a shipping company, and a new outfit came in and doing work here, doing container work. Right now we don't have no ship, but we have floor works and gate works working there at this terminal. Well, the Coast Guard wants to take 2/3 of the terminal, expand their operation 2/3 of that terminal, which will eliminate that terminal from operating. I mean, that would just kill the work, on many factors in here. Because if you do a study on the Coast Guard, you can hardly find any person of color. You can, one of the lowest level of any military complex or military, whatever you talk about, the Army forces, the Army. Up to date, the longest I've been around is a member comes to the port, or even walking by it while I'm driving by the port. That's so low, the amount of black. And when you compare it to Longshore work, which hire a lot of black, especially that community where we are.
Leith Kahl, ILWU 19, Seattle, Washington. I wanted to speak a little bit, try to finish what my coworker Gabriel Prawl, who's from the same port, same union, same port as I am, was talking about before his connection, because I work closely enough with Gabe. I think I know some of the struggle he was trying to outline that's going on up here in Seattle with the Coast Guard. And we have a scenario in Seattle that's definitely not identical, but very parallel to the struggle against the A's Stadium in Oakland, the attempt to privatize a big portion of the port of Oakland. We have 5 container terminals in Seattle, and 2 of them are in danger of being taken over completely by the Coast Guard. And there's no legitimate security reason that the Coast Guard needs. The stated reason is that we need to station icebreakers in Seattle to get to the North Pole and keep the North Pole open and free of ice in various seasons. Well, there's a lot of places that icebreakers could be stationed that are closer to the North Pole than Seattle, especially even within the Puget Sound, right? They could be stationed outside the Puget Sound, but even within the Puget Sound, there's closer places to the strait that gets you to the North Pole than Elliott Bay. So what's happening is that the Coast Guard as a public military institution is being used by some real estate interests who know that if they can get the container operations to cease on the terminals that are closest to downtown Seattle, that it will then be possible to line up a lot more hotel and condo development capital to build up that portion of the town near the waterfront in the way that they want it built up, and to further gentrify it, push the last of the poor people out, including potentially Chinatown. It would be a major blow to Chinatown if they can get that capital lined up. Get the capital lined up as long as there's a noisy container terminal operation next door, but a quiet Coast Guard base, no problem. So there's that. And then another force that we've recently found out is pushing for the Coast Guard to take over these 2 terminals. Guess what? It's SSA, Stevedoring Services of America, which has 2 of the other 3 terminals under its control. And SSA right now has a monopoly on container terminals in Seattle, on operational container terminals in Seattle, because its 2 competitors, TTI, which handled Hanjin, which went bankrupt, and Eagle Marine Services, which moved out of Seattle, are gone. So SSA is actually pushing for the Coast Guard to take over the remaining terminals, because then it would know it had no competition, or no potential competition, no way of any other stevedoring company coming in and competing with it. So it could remain a stevedoring monopoly in Seattle. So this is a fight against gentrification and against the Coast Guard and against one of our major employers. And it's interesting because the Coast Guard, as Gabriel pointed out, it is the whitest demographically. It's the whitest branch of the American Armed Forces. It hires the least people of color of any branch of the military. but also it was the branch of the military that the employers went to in the McCarthy period in the early 50s, when they passed the Magnuson screening program and the McCarran screening program to try to purge the maritime industry of militant trade unionists. And they did today, the echo of what they're doing is called the TWIC card, the Patriot Act of 2001. But in the original form of that TWIC card and Patriot Act was the McCarran the McCarran and Magnuson screening programs, where they purged hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of militant trade unionists out of their unions. And in fact, they purged so many that they killed an entire union, the Marine Cooks and Stewards, a very militant maritime union that was working very closely with the ILWU, was destroyed by this, by the Coast Guard purging people of the ability to go to their workplace and work on ships. And it just so happens, not coincidentally, that over 70% of the people purged by the Coast Guard from civilian jobs in the maritime industry from 1950 through 52 were African American. 70% of the people they purged were Black. So it was a huge blow to the earning power of the Black community in all the major coastal cities, including Seattle. And the ILWU fought back against it very hard. And there's a record of the ILWU fighting back against it in the Dispatcher newspaper's archives from 1950 through 52. If you look at the middle of 1950 all the way through 51 to the middle of 52, you'll see constant coverage of this issue, every single issue of the Dispatcher for that period. And ultimately, the screening program was ruled unconstitutional. But by the time it was ruled unconstitutional, much of the industrial damage had already been done. The purges had already taken place. The job loss had already taken place, and the Marine Cooks and Stewards had already been destroyed, no longer exists. So the struggle against the Coast Guard and the racism that the Coast Guard represents and has been used to implement in the maritime industry is a very old struggle that militant trade unionists on the West Coast of the United States have been fighting for a long time. That struggle continues, and that is, I think, the end point that my brother Gabriel was getting at in terms of that strike. That also has a relationship to our contract struggle, because it's much harder, and our brothers in South Africa can tell me right or wrong about this, but it's much more difficult to negotiate a good contract for maritime labor in conditions where the waterfront is privatized and or militarized. It's conditions are much more possible to organize in, much more possible to effectively organize for a good contract and secure a good contract when the waterfront is under municipal public sector jurisdiction. And so there's a reason that they put ballparks on waterfronts to try to privatize them. There's a reason why billionaires bid billions of dollars to try to buy up pieces of coastline. Well, here in Colombia, South Africa, Honduras, all over the world, there's the struggle between whether the waterfront is going to be a public sector or a privatized place is very much connected to whether waterfront workers are going to be allowed to build the type of organizations we need to build in order to secure good contract. And in that struggle, you generally find that the Democrats and the Republicans agree with one another that privatizing things is better than keeping them public, which goes back to what you all have been saying. To my locals' credit, we have put out that demand locally to local Democrats, and through it took a lot of work, but Maria Cantwell started out very much supportive of the Coast Guard, and she's come around to the ILWU's position. Not easily, though. Pressure had to be applied. It didn't automatically happen. But I think you're right, Steve. It needs to be more than just every local for itself, every local defend your own port. We need a coordinated coastwide strategy to defend our ports against privatization, which means, yes, we do have to have those kind of conferences where we talk about what is the capitalist strategy, what is the privatizer strategy in every waterfront, and how are we going to beat it back in every port on this coast.
And thank you, Leith, for picking up where I left off. But the thing that really mind-boggling is that people are suffering and hurting in this country. And Longshore work is one of the most good-paying jobs that to take people out of poverty, to make family have a better living, and the government is responsible to make sure that people can be able to live a better life in this country. But they work the opposite. They oppress and they instigate the whole purpose of building a country where there's more poverty than anywhere else. I mean, let's look at the fact that we send money for war machine all over the world, but you got people living in poverty here, homeless, and not able to feed a family, and then they make it an agenda to take away good jobs. So I mean, it doesn't fit up. The economy goes up, the price of everything goes up, but the earning for people to live a better life goes down. I mean, this doesn't add up. But I'm gonna be working here in Seattle, and I'm gonna be working with my brother there, Leith, and trying to do some kind of thing like they're doing in Oakland. It's forming an alliance so we can take up on this fight, because we can sit back and watch this go on, because it's gonna continue. And the fact that SSA wants to play that monopoly where they want to control the profits here in the Port of Seattle by eliminating other competition, I mean, that has to be stopped too, because it's not helping Longshore job, and the future of Longshore work is in danger right now. You know, and as you say, it should be more publicized. It should be more engaged. People should be more engaged, and Longshore workers need to be more engaged as well, not just a small group. Every Longshore worker needs to be more engaged. We need to be making this real fight be exposed worldwide, not just here in Seattle, like it's been going on. Like, at least that we reach out to people, but it's not good enough. We need to go further. We need to reach out to the world, because this is something that's going on all around the world.
Absolutely.
And we need to come together to fight this. You know?
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons this conference is taking place in Durban, South Africa, because they're trying to privatize the port. As Dubé was saying, the Port of Durban and Transnet is selling off the facilities and busting the unions basically through privatization. That's the ANC government. So it's an international issue. And I think we have to organize internationally against it and educate people about what's going on globally against privatization. And the Oakland, we have a SLAP, Schools and Labor Against Privatization, of teachers and Longshore. And we have to develop that and bring in public workers, all workers who are affected by privatization. And running up against it are the Democrats, who are pushing privatization of education, pushing privatization of the ports, pushing privatization of schools. I mean, everywhere they're pushing privatization. And that's another reason we need a Labor Party that's going to stand against privatization of public resources.